Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and kick off our workshop for today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to do a couple quick logistics and run through the agenda for us, and then we'll begin our program. So my name is Mike Centettos. I'm the policy director for the National Center for Sustainable Transportation at UC Davis. I'm going to be facilitating today's workshop on an active transportation census program. This workshop is part of a series we're organizing with the support of the Caltrans Division of Research, Innovation, and Systems Information. And the purpose of the series is really to share academic research and build understanding among Caltrans staff and Caltrans partners on a variety of environmental sustainability topics, and then hopefully facilitate a dialogue among staff on how research can inform the department's work and kind of work of transportation professionals in California. So today, as you know, we're focusing on how the department can begin collecting bicycle and pedestrian data in support of management needs. And I want to just give you a quick preview of the agenda. We're going to hear three kind of shorter presentations to kick us off here in the first hour from Caltrans, Federal Highways Administration, and a keynote from a very experienced professional in this field that I think is going to set a good stage for the rest of the agenda. Then we're going to have a series of presentations, which we've kind of framed as the nuts and bolts of developing an active transportation census program between roughly 9 and 11. We're going to hear from a couple of different regional agencies that have been doing this work and kind of coming at it from different directions. And then we're going to have a discussion toward the end on kind of starting to integrate some of these emerging sources of data into our kind of more traditional count methods. And then we'll wrap up. So we'll have a couple of breaks interspersed, give you a chance to kind of regroup, but this is going to be a very information dense workshop. So just know that all the presentations, recordings of the presentations will be posted on the event webpage following the workshop today, and I'll make sure to put that link in the chat a few times throughout today's remarks or throughout today's program. So if you have any technical issues, please use the chat box, send a message to us, and we will try to help you resolve that. I also have my email address here on the screen. You can email me as well. And then we will have opportunities for questions and answers throughout the program. And so you can use the Q&A box at any time, and we'll make sure to dedicate some time for that at the end of every presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off our program here. I will stop sharing my screen. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for some welcoming remarks. David Mann is the acting chief of the Division of Traffic Operations at Caltrans. And David, would love to turn it over to you so you can kick us off today. Thank you.
All right, sure, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the quick introduction. I am the acting division chief for traffic operations here in Caltrans. I've spent most of my career working Caltrans, mainly at the district level in the Bay Area, working in traffic operations, and I see that the topics here are definitely relevant as we have gone through quite a bit of transformation. So I want to welcome the transportation community to this workshop to discuss active and transportation census. I see that, we have really strong attendance here Monday morning. I know that we're expecting up to 200 folks here to join the call and the workshop. And this is really an exciting opportunity for Caltrans and others here in the industry to learn and share about an area that I believe has been traditionally overlooked in the past. As we are transitioning Caltrans from a vehicle-centric organization to an organization that's more people-centric, and that it's also that we're a organization that's starting to look at transportation as more of a borderless, seamless experience. Comprehensive multimodal data is increasingly crucial in terms of not only our planning efforts or design efforts, but also eventually our performance management aspects of our job here. And here in traffic operations at the statewide level, and here in California, we do want to take a leadership role in this area, in lockstep with our fellow transportation programs here internally, close collaboration with our local partners. We're really investing our resources and our time and energy to really better understand the transportation network and all of its users through the applications of the latest technologies, performance management systems, concepts, and also enhanced business practices. It is part of an effort that recently since I've come on board that I've really talked about is organizational maturity, and workshops like this really help with that. The development of active transportation program Census needs, really innovation, commitment, but also a mature organization that works together, that understands that we need to change manage, take risks. So that's really an exciting effort. Today's workshop is really going to be key for us to help reach those objectives and to continue to build on our commitment to multimodal excellence. And the input and the learning is just a very key aspect to all of that. And lastly, I do want to mention, and I think it's going to be talked about here, Caltrans recently released the Complete Streets Action Plan, which is collaboration of all departments along with the sustainability office helping putting it together. But we realized one of the key actions items out of the action plan includes the development and collection of active transportation data. So this is really a great time to have these discussions, of very salient points that I hope that we can make here together. So once again, without further ado, I want to thank thank you to all the participants and the presenters here. Let's just get this started today. So thank you again.
Great, thanks so much, David. So we are going to turn now to a federal perspective. So I'm going to introduce Darren Buck, and Darren, feel free to share your screen. I know you have a few slides. Darren's going to speak on the importance of collecting bicycle and pedestrian count data from the federal perspective. And Darren is with the Federal Highways Administration Office of Human Environment. So Darren, it looks like we can see your notes. So go ahead. Yep, there you go. And
awesome. All right. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Yes. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'll preface my remarks by saying I work for Federal Highway in an office called the Office of Human Environment. I work on pedestrian and bicycle projects with a predominant focus on street facilities for walking and bicycling. I am not a data guy. I'm a user of data. In my previous work at both state and local levels, I was the guy trying to push through the next project or the next plan, and always ruining the lack of data to support the things that I thought were worthy of advancing. Trying to prioritize what I was doing by what might have the most impact. And so those are really the uses of all kinds of data that I see for walking and bicycling. And I'm going to talk about walking and bicycling data, sort of putting into the context of this little diagram that we show here. A lot of what we do at Federal Highways around walking and bicycling are sort of structured around goals and actions identified in a document called the Strategic Agenda for Ped and Bike Transportation from about 6 years ago. It includes 4 main goals around walking and bicycling: networks, safety, equity, and trips. And then it outlines a bunch of actions related to capacity building, policy research, and what we're here to talk about today, data. It also advances some goals about getting to 0 fatalities nationwide within 20 to 30 years and increasing the percentage of short trips represented by walking and bicycling by 50%. So the need for data and walking and bicycling underlies all four of these areas. And as we go through the presentation, I'm going to try and sort of touch on data aspects in all four of those very loosely. Safety. Obviously, measuring safety depends on good detailed crash data, but as we encourage more people to walk and bicycle, good safety assessment requires us to know where people are walking and bicycling and in what numbers. In terms of networks, we can't promote more walking and bicycling without a good picture of where those people are, where they need to go, and validating that with actual measured volumes. Equity. Addressing the disproportionate safety impacts on historically underserved communities requires data, as well as knowing how well we're encouraging the use of cost-effective, sustainable transportation modes to provide access. And finally, trips. We've committed to getting more people walking and bicycling. How will we know what works best in doing that without measuring? And how will we ever know if we're making progress against that goal without measuring? So safety. This is a large part of what we do around walking and bicycling. And the early estimate of 2021 traffic fatalities is incredibly dire. This is a safety crisis. Over nearly 43,000 fatalities, an increase over 2020, the highest number since 2005, and a fatality rate that is higher than just about any peer nation we can find. Our roadway fatality and rates were declining for about 30 years, but that progress has stalled. And this graph just shows to 2020, where now 2021 is looking even worse. And those fatalities are increasing for those of us traveling outside of motor vehicles, making up the highest proportion of total roadway fatalities are those of us, including motorcyclists, people walking, bicycling, and other non-occupants, upwards of 34% of all roadway fatalities now. I'm going to touch on complete streets. You might have heard about Federal Highway's Complete Streets Initiative. One of the things that we were required to do by Congress was to produce a report on the opportunities and challenges with moving to a complete streets design model. And it basically asked us to answer the question, what are some of the opportunities and barriers to using a complete streets approach within the federal aid highway program? So we reviewed a lot of policy, rules, procedures, regulations for impact of safety on all users, and identified some opportunity areas and challenges and how those could potentially be solved. Would definitely encourage you to check out the report. But specific to this gathering today, improving data collection and analysis to advance safety for all users was one of those 5 big challenge areas. We need more data to support a data-driven project selection process, and we need measures of performance to support decision makers in addressing all transportation modes. So the sort of main solution areas corresponding in this area were to improve network and usage data to better inform development of complete streets and provide clearer guidance on measures of performance for projects supporting safety for all users. It's just worth kind of underlining maybe the significance here. Federal Highway told Congress that one of the 5 most significant challenges in complete streets implementation in the US is data collection and analysis for all users. And within the report, it's pretty frank that walking and bicycling data collection and analysis was one of the largest challenges within that. And we put ourselves on record saying that we would improve that. This is just a graph I honestly, in cooperation with some coworkers, threw together a couple of weeks ago as we were trying to come up with a usable framework to begin thinking about just sort of all the massive work that we need to do in this area. And we sort of came up with these sort of 6 main areas of data that we talk about a lot and how we need, including crash and safety surrogate data, station counts, which we'll largely be discussing today, passive probe route and volume data. So the getting GPS traces from, say, commercial providers. Facility data is a huge challenge. Finding out where we have bikeways and sidewalks and trails installed, where they are, the physical attributes of those. Built environment, how all of the different land use variables and trip generation that underlies so many of the determinants of whether or not people will walk and bicycle and at what rate. And finally, demographic data, knowing who lives where, who travels where, so that we know that our interventions are serving our entire population. And as we blend some or all of those into network connectivity analysis, being able to do the things with data that hopefully get us to a point where walking and bicycling gets closer to a state of parity with motor vehicle modes, besides exposure and safety analysis, which is obviously a huge need. We have a great need to get into evaluating how well our projects are doing at their stated goals, prioritizing those projects, forecasting what interventions at a project or network scale may be able to provide in terms of both safety and participation, estimating the benefits of walking and bicycling, estimating how well we're doing at our equity goals, and finally revealing preferences. So much of walking and bicycling, we depend on people's perception of comfort, safety. Are our interventions be proving out through revealed preference to succeed in that manner? A little bit about some of the resources that we've done on walking and bicycling data collection. The 2016 traffic monitoring guide includes a chapter on traffic monitoring for non-motorized traffic, and we're working on some changes right now to that format to simplify it a little bit. It details the format for non-motorized data, so it can be incorporated into the Travel Monitoring Analysis System, or TMAS. And there's a supplementary document on coding non-motorized station location information in that format. So anybody with location-based walking or bicycling data can upload it into TMAS. And the hope is that someday we can begin using a national scale data set to identify changes, trends, and other insights. If you have walking and bicycling data that you're willing to submit to TMAS, my colleague at Federal Highway, Stephen Jesberger, is the expert in this area. And that data for bicycling in particular could be supplemented by the National Bikeway Network, which is a system under development by the Office of Policy that would collect geodata on bicycle facilities of all type, with the possibility of someday creating a national geodatabase of an entire bicycle travel network. Some other resources, we conducted a few years ago a bicycle pedestrian count technology pilot project. And the purpose of that pilot was to increase organizational and technical capacity of primarily MPOs to establish and operate effective walking and bicycling count data programs and provide lessons learned for peers across the country. 10 MPOs were selected to participate, and the report highlights some of their experiences with identifying count locations, selecting, installing technology, and collecting and using the count data. The report includes some key benefits and lessons learned throughout the course of the project, and then 2 relatively recent peer exchanges that we did covered questions related to the collection of walking and bicycling data. What does an agency do with that data once it's begun collecting it? So Arlington, Virginia, they have years worth of station count data, and they want to create a way to put that into practice to justify and prioritize in new projects. And an MPO in the Columbus, Ohio region wanted to be able to validate and manage the data in a way that will be reliable. Both of these peer exchanges, they were conducted under the USDOT's Planning Capacity Building Program. And so we'd urge any locality, state, region wrestling with a significant walking or bicycling problem, whether it's planning, data, design, etc. Go ahead and submit a proposal for a peer exchange. It's obviously timely topics, and we love getting the opportunity to talk through thorny challenges like those. Getting into broader measures of walking and bicycling, 5 years ago, we published a guidebook for ped and bike performance measures. It shows a broad range of voluntary options for developing walking and bicycling performance measures that can track over time. On the right, you'll see a highlight of about 30 different ways to track performance, and many of these rely in part or whole on measures of walking and bicycling data. Let's talk a little bit about sort of shift to networks and planning for multimodal networks. The importance of measuring networks and how critical it is in measuring a variety of performance outcomes. So basically, a safe system approach requires knowing where the most vulnerable people in your system will be, people walking and bicycling. And this is exposure analysis, a notoriously difficult task to do when talking about walking and especially bicycling. A large part of knowing where people will be and estimating how many people there will be comes from defining, measuring, and analyzing the local multimodal network. It's not as simple a task as putting on a map of all your sidewalks and bike lanes. It's kind of taking a holistic look at your entire local network and analyzing the relative suitability of every segment for walking and bicycling. So this process is covered in Federal Highway's Guidebook to Measuring Multimodal Network Connectivity, which I'll describe next. And in defining your network, you have an essential building block in understanding where people will be. The other building block, of course, is count data and using that data in combination. Our office provided grants to 8 different communities to sort of implement the principles from the guidebook. And a very common obstacle noted by the grantees was the absence of basic data on attributes that impact whether or not a street is safe or comfortable for people to walk on. That's also available on our website, sort of the outcome. We did a final report on that pilot grant program. So we'll talk a little bit about the guidebook. It includes a number of case studies of places that applied those principles in the guidebook, including one in California, Contra Costa County. It outlines just sort of a basic 5-step process and talks about some analysis methods. The analysis method includes looking at one, some, or all of the listed aspects and defines what a network looks like for walking and bicycling. Is it complete? How dense is it? How direct are the routes? And how many destinations can a user reasonably access? And the one I'll delve into a little bit more, what is its quality level? How do people perceive it? These diagrams from the guidebook, if you squint real hard at them, they show how the 4 physical attributes of a walking or bicycling network from the top, completeness, density, directness, and access to destinations can really change radically when you apply from left to right a progressively higher quality standard to them. So if you define the walking and bicycling network as any street where people are permitted to walk or bike, it's going to look, the network is going to look highly direct, dense, accessible, and complete. However, as you get more selective, say you define everywhere where I would be comfortable walking or bicycling with my 6-year-old daughter, the facilities, your effective network is going to begin to degrade along those 4 measures as you get more selective, as shown in the diagram. In bicycling in particular, research shows people are highly sensitive to that quality and their perception of how safe they are. You have probably heard of level of traffic stress. It's a measure of people's stress tolerance. Survey data shows that a majority of people want to ride bicycles, but have a low traffic stress tolerance. For those entities who want to measure the efficacy of their own efforts to get more people riding bicycles more often, measuring how their network connectivity is operating at a level of quality where most people will reasonably ride is an important indicator of their own performance. And a very significant research need is to validate our assumptions and our attempts to deliver higher quality networks against actual data.
Darren, maybe like 1 more minute to wrap up.
Oh, sure thing. Quick mention of our NHI bicycle facility design class, which goes into planning principles, a little bit about equity. We often talk about equity in terms of the walking and bicycling, in terms of the growing safety crisis. We have a number of resources on the Ped Bike Info Center, PBIC, related to equity, including a great white paper on pursuing equity in pedestrian and bicycle planning. And we'd urge you to check out the US DOT Equity Action Plan, which is a new document that sort of provides a framework under which we will be implementing the administration's executive orders on equity. And that's about all I had. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to be sitting in the entire time and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Darren. I think that was very helpful framing in terms of kind of the dearth of data that exists and the need for it. And so that'll kind of help set the stage for what's coming next here, which will be a presentation from Elizabeth Stoltz. And Liz, I'll invite you to share your screen as well. So Liz is the director of traffic data programs at Marlin Engineering, and she's been doing this work for 30 years, working with government, private agencies to develop traffic data programs, including motorized and non-motorized traffic counting programs at the city, county, and state level. And so, Liz, we're thrilled to have you with us, and looking forward to hearing about how we can start thinking about developing a successful active transportation census program.
All right, can you hear me and do you see my screen? All right, perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Mike, and thank you for inviting me today. I am honored and humbled to be your keynote speaker today for this very important topic of active transportation counting, bicycle, pedestrian, and now micromobility. And I'm going to try to share a lot of information in a short amount of time today. But my contact information will be on the last slide. So if you want more in-depth information, I'd be happy to share. And as Mike mentioned, I am a national expert at counting. So I have both motorized and non-motorized background. So that's sort of how I ended up in micromobility counting. Here's kind of what I'm going to try to cover in a short amount of time, like I mentioned, really the history and the reason why we financially want to count. I'm going to cover the elements of a micromobility program. I'm going to try to provide you with some lessons learned. There are so many more I could share. I'm also going to share some helpful resources at the end, and then where to go from here. So the very first thing, if people ask me, why do we have to count bicycle and pedestrian traffic data? I always say the same reasons as we count every other mode. What gets measured gets done, and if you're not counted, you don't count. If an agency person is asking me this, I usually say, do you count motorized traffic? Do you count cars? Do you count trucks? And if you do, then you should be counting micromobility because they're all using the facility. And traditionally, these motorized traffic programs have been around since the 1950s or even earlier. So we are just now getting into micromobility counting. And so we have a ways to catch up to the motorized, but we have a way to do this. And where did we really start doing this? What's the history? There's the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project, which is 100% based on manual counting. You might have a program that does this. I'm going to illustrate to you why we have evolved from that. I will try to convince you to go to a more automated counting type of program. And I'll explain to you why. I'm going to give you some examples as to why we want really highly accurate data. Then we've evolved from just putting automated counters out to really a non-motorized bicycle and pedestrian collection program. I started the nation's first statewide program in 2007 at the Colorado DOT as an employee of the DOT. So we started with no funding and no staff. And the way we started our program is basically adding it on as another thing to do to our motorized program. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And now really what's happening is not just bicycle and pedestrian, but we have scooters and all sorts of e-bikes, and now we're calling these micro-mobility programs. So I might say a few notes about the future in that we're probably evolving to one day using big data sources and buying the data. But what I'm presenting today is really, you always have to have a calibration data set. And you always want to make sure that these big data sources are of high quality. And so you'll never get away from having some continuous counters or doing some spot checking with some automated counting technologies. And as these big data sources do come out, I would advise you to be very cautious on the quality. And if the quality matches the use that you are trying to use the data for, then that's fine. But if you want really high quality data, you need a calibration data set. And what do I mean by high quality data? The history that I talked about, we might have somebody that sits in a building and might be looking off on the trail. This happens to be from a real story of counting history, where the Cherry Creek Trail that goes around Denver, somebody might be sitting in their desk watching the Cherry Creek Trail, counting one person going by, so on and so forth. And you can just imagine how inaccurate that data might be. They might only do it for a 2 or 3 hour period, and they might get interrupted or have gaps in their collection. So this is a very manual way of collecting. You might actually be on the trail counting. There are uses for this data. This is what I would call the calibration or spot check of the calibration data set, which is the automated counting that I'm going to show you in the next slide. So I wouldn't say throw all of this data away. I would say use it to check your automated counting. And what do I mean by a better way to count using automation? As you see, this infrared counter sits on a pole, a person passes the infrared counter, and then they get counted. This is an automated technology counting every single hour of every single day, and it could be 365 days a year. Technologies are really evolving, and what you see here is camera technology is really starting to open our eyes to really not just counts, but what's visually going on at the facility. This happens to be a bridge in Tampa called the Platt Street Bridge. We have 21,000 motorized cars that go on this facility, and you can see in yellow are the trajectory lines of the pedestrians, and in red are the bicyclists and the trajectory lines of the bicyclists. You can see from here, we have 3,000 micromobility travelers. So we begin to understand that very quickly, visually, we can see some safety issues with pedestrians crossing the roadway. We can see people are mostly using the sidewalks. And from an operations standpoint, that helps to know that these facilities are being used and how they're being used. I can give a whole nother presentation on why we should count, and I can give examples across the nation, but in the interest of time, I'm going to just give them to you in this written format for now. If you would like that presentation, I'd be happy to schedule something with you later. But you can see I picked the top 6 reasons really are safety, operations, maintenance, performance, economic development, and really understanding your traffic patterns. And again, I will reiterate that if you're not counted, then you don't count, basically. There are financial reasons for counting. As Darren mentioned, there's a federal funding formula where we're required to do motorized counting. And it basically works like this. The more cars we have in our roadways, the more linear miles of roadway we have, the more federal funding we get, right? But I challenge everyone to think about what if federal regulation changes. It's starting to change, as Darren mentioned. It's getting increasingly more important for micromobility data. Will your program be ready for reporting if you are incentivized by getting federal funding by having non-motorized travelers in your network? And most people would say, no, I'm not ready. And even if the federal regulation changed tomorrow, you couldn't just quickly start up a program and be reporting numbers. So what I would say is start now is a great time. Use your motorized programs as a model. methods are already established in the motorized program. Leverage your existing investments in technology, hardware, and software, and your people that have done data analysis on the traffic side. So you really need to partner with the traffic operations, the traffic monitoring folks. And as Darren mentioned, the traffic monitoring analysis system already accepts bicycle and pedestrian count data. What you see on this slide is an example of what they do right now in reporting. Every month, they report motorized travel volume trends, whether the motorized traffic goes up or down. One day, I think they'll probably publish a report with micromobility data. There are a number of considerations for starting a program. I'm not going to read them to you here, but you can see them here on the screen. And there's a lot of activities and actions that you need to take if you're starting a program from scratch. I'm going to give you a lot of information in the next few slides on on strategic planning and site selection. And I think those are the two key components, but we'll get there in just a second. So why don't we take a look at all of the elements really quickly, and then we'll dive into each element of a program. Often overlooked are strategic planning, item number 1, and item number 2, site selection. People zip all the way to buying equipment, and then they haven't thought about strategic planning or where they're going to put the counter, and they haven't established partnerships. I urge you to start your program with a solid strategic planning process. It would be similar to building a house and not having a blueprint. Eventually, there'll be cracks in the wall, and you'll have to come back and patch them if you don't do the proper strategic planning. So let's dive into a little bit about each one of the components here. And let's start with the importance of strategic planning. What does strategic planning do? It establishes your program and documents all your procedures and methodologies. I will give you an example of what the Florida DOT has done. They started their program 4 years ago, and what they've decided to do is partner with all of these local agencies. So they documented all their methods, how they're going to select sites. They provided a criteria list of how to select a site. They trained partners how on site. We did virtual site visits, and we did on-site visits. And because of all that work and the training they did with their partners, a local partner decided to hire Marlin Engineering to do a strategic plan for the Tampa Bay area. And you can see all the Tampa Bay partners on that list. And because of all of those partners, they were able to get free data from the state because they offered to help collect the data. And so you can see all 13 sites listed there. Different agencies have set up their programs differently. In the case of Colorado DOT, I think they're still even managing their entire program in-house. They pay a contractor to do already their motorized counts, short duration counts, and they just add the short duration micromobility counts to that contract. They then in-house install all of their own continuous counters, both on the motorized and non-motorized side. In the case of North Carolina, they decided to contract with the university, and that's how they built their program. From what I understand, they're actually bringing it back in-house now, but that was about 7 years ago that they started their program. And it worked out really well with a partnership with the university to manage all of the data collection and the repository. And then there's the Florida DOT that's done a little bit of a hybrid, hiring Marlin Engineering to really do all the specialty data collection activities. We've also helped build training programs, and we've done a lot of partnership agreement work as well for Florida DOT. So when you're doing your strategic planning, and here's a lesson learned from the Florida DOT, we sent a survey out to all of the city and county and MPOs, And we got 264 respondents 4 years ago. In those responses, we got over 400 recommendations of where people would like to see us count. So you want to send out a survey right away during your planning process, and you want to find out, are people already collecting data? And you can see we asked this question, and there were quite a few agencies already collecting data, but the majority were not. Then you want to ask questions like, what am I going to use this data for? And you can see the top reasons are facility planning, traffic operations, safety, so on and so forth. And the last critical question that I pulled up to share with you today is, you want to ask if your agencies are willing to help. And if they're willing to help, that helps promote them as far as where you want to focus your data collection efforts. Because if they'll help set up a counter, if they will help buy a counter, if they'll help with resources and funding, these are the folks you want to partner with if you have to prioritize. Site selection is so important, often underestimated, and really is a dynamic process and can change with the political environment, can change with technology changes, and can change with funding availability. We want to consider when you're picking sites to collect from, you really should hire an expert that has been through the process before, so that you are not wasting time in trying to put the wrong technology at the wrong site. You really want to match this site with the type of site technology together. You want to make sure that you're thinking through the formatting and the collection methods before you even go out and collect data. It really helps to have done this before, and it really helps to conduct virtual site visits as well as on-site visits before you even buy any equipment. You want to create a list of very specific criteria for selecting sites before you even start doing site selection. So there's some very methodical and technical ways to do this that are very optimized and strategic in nature. And if I have to say the top two things that are important, that is strategic planning and site selection. Again, doing virtual site visits helps to discover all sorts of things in the environment, and then actually physically going out and watching some of the behaviors and where the technologies might fit is a really critical part of a collection program. Making sure that we're establishing partnerships takes your program, maybe a startup program, and escalates it very quickly. The Florida DOT has done a great job, I think one of the best in the nation on the non-motorized program side. They have over 500 partners now, 4 years into the program. And they've created a committee where they have regular meetings twice a year. And they really have established a loaner equipment program at this point. For the first 2 years, they spent strategic planning, doing site selection. Then they bought some equipment. By year 3 and 4. They have started doing and training their partners on how to collect data. And they're going to turn that short duration counting, because they can't keep up with all of those short duration counts. So they're turning it into a loaner count program. And then they've allocated a lot of funding to their continuous counting program, which they will continue to manage going forward. And they're going to rely on their partners to do all the short duration counting. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to establish these partnerships. Where do we get money to do this? Everybody is strapped for money and competing for funds. Like I mentioned, Colorado DOT didn't have any funding for the program to start out with. We just added it on to the motorized program. And then we went for a grant and got a grant from the Kaiser Permanente group. So we were able to add 8 permanent counters right away from that grant. We waited around for more money, and we found leftover monies in the motorized program that we could allocate to the non-motorized program. We taught others how to do this in the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. They went off and took what we did and got 2 and 3 grants to fund their program. And Florida DOT just recently got a Baptist hospital to fund a site, and they're getting ready to fund a second site. And they had a local running club even fund a site. So there are ways very strategic to find funding as well. Let's not forget the actual data collection that has to happen, but we want to think about data usage from the very beginning. We want to make sure that we're collecting data that's complete across the facility. And by that, I mean the sidewalk, the bike lane, and a trail. If it crosses, you want to count all of those travelers. And then you want to evaluate your equipment and technologies based on the site, and make sure that that equipment is going to work for the site you pick. When you're deploying equipment, you really want to plan ahead of time. In some cases, this is in Florida, at the Florida DOT program, we put in infrared camera and tubes at the same site. And so you want to think through are we overlapping? Or are we capturing just one number? Because you want to be able to publish an ADT, or an annual daily traffic number. And you can see in this case, it's 685 on this particular site. In the case of Florida, we also had transit ridership numbers. So we're also publishing those on a map. At the bottom, you also want to think through data usage, and it can get very complicated with a lot of statistics very quick. On the lower right-hand side, you can see we want to think about the future of data collection and really how to report what's going on in that kind of scenario. Don't ever forget about, well, we're collecting all this data, we want to put it somewhere, and we want it available for people to access. The Florida DOT program by year 2 was buying equipment and immediately got over 100 counts. 90 of them were short duration, and then they installed 10 continuous counters. So the program escalates very quickly, and so you want to be ready when you start collecting data. Now let's look at some local lessons learned. As I mentioned, we want to think through data storage and reporting. And in the case of the Florida DOT program, it was very hard for some folks that don't work with traffic data, monitoring data on a regular basis, to understand all the complicated numbers that come with it. And as you see in the graphic, we could have a crossing number of 156. We could have directional data, and so on and so forth. So what we did was we created this sort of proprietary disaggregate pyramid, so that if an engineer just needs an AADT, that's a level 1 data. And then it steps down to a level 2 data, might be in each direction. Level 3 might be separated bicycle versus pedestrian. And then you get all the way to level 5, which is the raw data. So again, don't forget about reasons to count. And I wanted to highlight this example in Tampa, again, in the downtown area, where we collected data in front of Franklin and Zach at the theater crossing. And it's a camera 24-hour count site. It's the first time in the nation I've seen counting that has shown micro mobility travels actually higher than motorized traffic data on this facility. So if you count, sometimes you can find really interesting things. You can see the motorized AADT is 2229 here, and the micro mobility counts are 2822. Are we getting close, Mike?
Yeah, maybe wrap up in a minute or two.
I'm almost there. Thanks. So we have also, we don't want to forget about the analytics. We can collect all this data, but if you can't put it on the chart that's on the right-hand side of this slide and start comparing sites to each other, it is no good. And the data doesn't come out of the counters this way, because you're counting 12, 13 different sites. So in this case, you can see the Zach Street is the 3rd highest volume that we collected in the Tampa Bay area. So Those are critically important, but you really need a traffic data analyst to understand and help in reporting this kind of data. Getting close to ending here, I just want to share some helpful program resources. As Darren mentioned earlier, there's the Traffic Monitoring Guidebook. There's also the National Highway Institute that actually I teach the national course on traffic monitoring. So if you're interested, go on the NHI website, sign up, because we're starting to teach the course all over the nation. In September, we have it in New Hampshire. In October, it's going to be in Alaska, and in November, it's going to be in Idaho. So, so that's the course you want to look for and the course number. Attend conferences. NatMac is a conference that happens every 2 years. You can see in 2024 is the next one. And then the last resource I'll give you is the Transportation Research Board, which is really critically important to sort of what's going on nationally, as well as statewide and local. And if you go to the UC Davis website, you can see that all these resources are actually located on that link as referenced below. I'm going to end with the where to go from here. Start with building a strategic plan, get all of your site selection criteria documented in that plan. Hire people that are doing this work and have done it before. Attend conferences where you can learn from others. Contact existing programs where people can help you. Establish partnerships, and let's prepare for reporting and sharing all sorts of data with others. And with that, I think I'm right on time. I'm going to close it and turn it right back to you, Mike. And there's my contact information.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was a phenomenal overview, and you covered a lot of really good, rich, data-rich presentation. So thank you, and thank you for pitching the website that you mentioned there that I put in the chat as well. We do have a number of resources for you there on the website, and I'll make sure to put that in the chat again. Maybe we'll just take a quick question or two, probably one for you, Liz. We have gotten a couple questions that I think we'll get into a little bit more in the next session. So we'll flag those. But Liz, we got a question about someone who works for a small municipality, under 1,000 residents, and they're looking for advice on how some of this data collection can be done with, those types of really limited staff and resources.
Sure. And I know others can speak up, maybe Darren, to that as well. I would say that I've worked with even bicycle group, like the running group, that just momentum happens when you start. First thing is you have to have a champion that wants to see it happen. And then you have to have these conversations. If you're in a town that's close to any bigger city that can help in that funding, and if not, I would say go see if you can get grants, because there are grants specifically for these smaller communities. So I have often given advice on how to do some of these things, and then these agencies will get a grant and then they'll hire me to come in and help them. So there are a lot of different ways to make that happen. And I'll let Darren add to that, because I know he's got some experience as well with that.
I would say that it's, it depends on what you're measuring, what the program, what you think the outcomes might be, or what you're sort of theorizing them to be. A small project, you may, we've talked a lot about automated station counting, and I think somebody replied that there's a temporary counter loan program available in California. Those are great options for getting just sort of short duration samples of, say, a week before, a week after. That's tremendously helpful. I know in projects, if I did small projects where we thought, we're not completely reconstructing a streetscape, we're not linking up two neighborhoods via a gap, we're redoing a streetscape, and we think people are going to like it more or feel safer, or whatever. And sometimes a very, very simple intercept survey might be the way you measure the performance of that. I remember one project we did a poster board with a frowny face on one end and a smiley face on the other, and asked passersby to rate before and after. And it was just that bone simple to. We weren't writing any TRB papers about it, but it gave us a data point to be able to say, here's the perception of what people thought of a project before and after. So I guess, long story short, I would just say, what exactly are you trying to measure? Liz's suggestion of sort of reaching out to partners it is a good one. There's in most communities, there's sort of a tremendous source of enthusiasm for a lot of the things that we do, and finding a partner who perhaps is willing to spend that 2 or 3 hours curbside with a clicker you'll be well rewarded, I think, in having that data to be able to sort of back up your project.
And maybe one more thing I thought of is I've seen agencies make it a routine part of their design process. Whenever we put in a facility, we put in a counter, or we do a count before and we do a count after before it gets built. So making it a routine part of the city's operations and traffic operations. As David was mentioning, we've done a good job of motorized traffic operations, but maybe we can do the same thing on non-motorized and micromobility going forward.
Great. Well, I think like I said, we'll hold those other couple of questions for the next session. I think we'll get into those in a little bit more depth. I'll just say, and I noticed that Julia typed in an answer to one of the questions. We have really a vast wealth of expertise on this workshop. So if other presenters want to type in answers to any of the questions you're seeing, then definitely feel free to do that. So Liz, thank you so much once again. We are going to go into a short break here. We'll take 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to really dig into some of the specifics, some of the nuts and bolts of designing an active transportation census program. So we're going to have a series of presentations there. So we will come back at 9:08 and start that series of presentations. So we'll see you then. Thank you.